Dan Vandervliet, welcome to Succession Stories. Tell me a bit about you and your career journey with family businesses.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Lori. My pathway to family business was certainly not linear. In the year 2000, I joined the University of Vermont and their continuing ed department. At the time, we called these non-traditional learners. And these were typically adults who worked in business. I would interface often with business leadership to try to bring university resources to these businesses. At the time, we had a partnership, continuing ed did, with the business school at the University of Vermont. We had a very forward-thinking dean at the business school there, Rocky Lee DeWitt, who became quite a mentor for me in the family business space. As that evolved, Vermont had a small family business program at the time, and the director left. And Rocky literally looked at me and said, "Hey, you know a lot of business owners. This could be something that's good for you." At the time, and this was around the year 2003, I knew nothing about family business, but I was instantly drawn to it because of the personal nature of the work that we get to do. It's not about the numbers as much as it is about the people and the relationships. And I really threw myself into family business at that point, helped to grow that program over the next really 15 years. We saw great success in offering a class in family business, and suddenly, students started coming forward saying how this was important to them. We ran a number of what we called forums. These were programs specifically for business owners and their successors. We also developed a number of peer groups. These were kind of Vistage and YPO style peer groups for both CEOs and successors. Really enjoyed that work and helped to build the UVM program up to a pretty respectable level. In the year 2014, Cornell received a gift to establish the Smith Family Business Initiative, and that was a good time, I felt, to really take what I had learned at the University of Vermont and bring it to Cornell. And I've been here since as the founding director of the Smith Family Business Initiative. And it's been really a remarkable journey. And again, I think what to this day I still enjoy most about it is the interpersonal nature, the time that we get to spend with students who are exploring all the options that family business present to them, to talk with successors who might be struggling with certain aspects of coming into the family business, or to talk with senior generation leaders who are trying to figure out strategy or communication, or eventually how they want to leave the business and their legacy. And it's greatly rewarding work. And to be able to work with businesses across all industries, all parts of the world, really, is really fascinating to me, because I contend that no matter how many zeros are on the bottom line, a lot of the family issues are fairly universal. We can kind of add or subtract based on certain aspects or variables, but family is family. And I think we always, whether we're in business with them or not, there are great rewards to it, but also ongoing challenges.
Absolutely. And it is fascinating. And I'm so glad that we've gotten connected. I probably should mention, so that our listeners understand the context here. We were introduced by mutual friends, Shelley Taylor, Jim Taylor. They are part of the family business and Cornell alums. And I am a Cornell alum. They and as well as I graduated at different times, but we've gotten connected because of family businesses here where I live in Pittsburgh. And being a Cornell alum, I was class of 93. And very much have tried to stay actively involved with Cornell. But as you mentioned, 2014 was quite a number of years after I graduated. So when I learned about the Smith Family Business Initiative at Cornell, and Shelley and Jim, of course, were gracious to give me an introduction to you, I was really excited to talk to you, Dan, because of all the reasons you just said, all the great background that you have, and then the extensive relationships that you have with family businesses. So why don't we talk a little bit about Cornell and the Smith Family Business Initiative? What's the mission of the organization?
We exist to help all of those that work in, for, or with a family business. And we classify that as, our traditional people like Jim and Shelley. They work very much in the family business. Shelley also works with family businesses as a consultant, as do you. So as somebody who is working with a family business, there's a certain set of skills needed to understand what might be going on beyond what is often being shared with you from a business perspective. How do you build relationships across generations? How do you get families unstuck from things that might be very deeply hidden in the family? And then those that work in family business. You could be an HR person. You could be, a senior manager, and that presents another set and opportunities as well. So we see these people as students. And these are students that end up in the class that I teach. We see these people as many of our alumni, like yourself and Jim and Shelley and many others, as well as really anyone in the family business ecosystem. We are not exclusive to Cornell. So our conferences and events are generally open to all who are interested in getting connected into that network and learning more about their position in the family business.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the myths and realities of family businesses. There's such a popular culture with fun shows that everyone probably is familiar with, from whether it's Dallas and Dynasty to, Arrested Development and of course, Succession. What are some of the favorite myths that you come across that you love to debunk?
Yeah, whenever I give a talk, and if I could talk to your audience members right now, I would ask them, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you hear the term family business? And I often track these results over time. And without fail, small instantly pops up. Words like fighting or conflict or it's complicated are top of the list. And then also sort of this slow, insular, that they're not competitive or they just can't compete with the big ones. The small one really gets me because often I will get introduced if I'm giving a talk or whatnot, and invariably they will switch out family and small, and so they'll call it the Small Business Initiative at Cornell, even when I warn them not to do that. So this mindset that small and family business go hand in hand, I think, is very interesting. I think it's natural because these are probably the businesses we relate to, the corner store, the restaurant, the gas station, the hardware store. These are the ones we see in our communities all the time. And certainly many of those are small. But as we work across the spectrum of family business to medium size enterprises as well as large, by definition, Walmart and Ford are still family owned businesses. So it's a very broad spectrum. And of course, there are a lot of different ways that those businesses remain family owned. But I think to see them as only small or, kind of old and dated is not true. The myth around conflict, I think, is natural. And I think that's what plays in the media. Succession is a great example of this. It's a very entertaining story. And many of those issues are real. This is obviously, given a little bit of a Hollywood touch, and there's a lot of money involved, and the relationships are certainly amplified. But I think that the challenge is when that's what people see on TV or we hear the stories in the news, it certainly does taint the image of what family businesses can be like. I have sat with many family businesses that are just inspiring to me in the way that they approach not only their family relationships, but their business relationships. It's never easy. There are always challenges to it. But I think you have to sort of get beyond some of the Hollywood stereotypes or what we read in the headlines, because that's entertainment, whether it's real or not. But there are many family businesses that do amazing work.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And excellent points. What do you see as the economic impact of family businesses in the United States, whether it's from an employment standpoint or just from total contribution to the economy?
Yeah, this is one I think that catches people off guard. And even when I started here at Cornell and we didn't have a family business program, I had to sort of sell some of the other faculty members on why we needed a family business program. there was a study that was just done in 2021, and this actually updated the study done by Astrakhan and Shanker 2003. So the original article in 2003 looked at the economic impact of family businesses on specifically the U.S. economy. And it has remained one of the most widely cited articles in family business literature. It had not been looked at since that time. And if we think about what has happened since the year 2003, sort of the dot-com boom has come and gone, the real estate boom. Of course, the internet has grown. The way we do business has changed dramatically. We do scale now. Of course, the Great Recession, numerous presidents, world conflicts. So it was time to update this study. And what we found is that, if anything, the economic impact has possibly grown some. So 59% of employment in the private sector workforce is generated by family-owned businesses. They account for about 83.3 million jobs. One interesting note is that we identified 32.4 million family-owned businesses just as an actual number. That number actually came up almost 10 million from the year 2003. So I get the question a lot, like, what's the future of family-owned businesses? And I think it's very solid. We live in a time of great change, and that has only accelerated over the last 2 years with the worldwide pandemic. And I contend that innovation and entrepreneurship still begins at home. And so for anyone who's thinking of how to build a better mousetrap, they get started in the home. And it is undeniable that the first people that they will turn to, whether it's for investment capital, whether it's for physical capital, whether it's for access to business networks, or sometimes just growing up inside an entrepreneurial family, there are certain traits that are learned. You are going to turn to your family in those situations because you trust those people, and there is a cost that is beneficial to doing business with family. So this report that was done in 2021, authored by Torsten Pieper out of South Carolina, I think really underscored that family businesses still have great impact on the U.S. economy, whether they're classified as small, medium, or large enterprises. And they are still, a force to be reckoned with when it comes to economic impacts. I'd go one step further and just say that's specifically U.S. At Cornell, of course, we deal with a very global population of students. We have students that come from Latin America, where as many as 95% of businesses are family-owned or family-controlled. In India, that number, I've seen a report that it approaches almost 98% family-owned.
Wow.
So while they are greatly important here in the U.S., as you go further afoot, that number just continues to increase greatly.
That is a really big number. One of the things you mentioned, I want to just come back to, which is about innovation. And if there's so many businesses that are growing and thriving, how do we ensure their continuation in this age of disruption? And I think one of the myths, which some of us probably have encountered if we've worked in family-led businesses, is that there's a resistance to change. Now, certainly that could be generational. Some folks have come on my show where they've talked about the stereotypes, the sayings like the spouting whale gets harpooned. And some people have come on the show and talked about they were given the keys, given the baton, and then told, don't screw it up. And so that really sets the tone and the culture for their leadership when they become in charge of the company. So there's a challenge there. And mature family-led companies that are not innovating are going to die, right? It's just a reality. Any company that doesn't innovate is going to die, just in our dynamic environment. What are some of the best practices that you've seen when it comes to these multi-generational companies in adopting an innovation culture and innovation practices? One of the phrases that I've heard from my good friend, Sean Amorati, we teach a class together at Carnegie Mellon in the Entrepreneurship Center, and he calls it innovation theater. That innovation theater means we give it lip service and we say we're doing innovation, but we're really not, right? So innovation theater, what is the reality when it comes to being effective or just having innovation theater?
Yeah, this is an important component for family business, and this is what I sometimes use the analogy of the double-sided sword. Is that yes, family businesses can certainly be stagnant. They can have leadership in place that is resistant to change, and that is very much a reality. And we see those businesses often struggle and either sell or fail. But I think the other side of that is that the family is a great place for innovation. That should be the place where we can take these risks, where there should be room for growth, and where they should be accepting of this next generation coming in who has grown up in a very different world, even than you and I. You mentioned you graduated in '93. That was the same year I graduated, and email was barely even a thing when we graduated, and the internet, you still had to pick up a phone and connect it to the modem. And when you think about this generation of students that are coming into play, they just do business and they see the world in a completely different way that we do. Now, in regards to best practices, I think it would be really hard to pinpoint one, but I think a few things. First, it starts with governance. And I say governance sort of small g, and by that I mean, the ability of a family to talk and be open and have a forum for these ideas. And that can be more formal if there are things like board of advisors, board of directors, family council, because this is, where some of those voices begin to be heard and incorporated. And if you are the next generation in that family, you begin to understand, what the business is all about. I think families need to educate the next generation and what the business is about, what the values are, and what the future is. When do mom and or dad plan on stepping aside, and what's the process for picking that successor? So I think that's a starting point that should not be overlooked. One of the practices that I've seen, and again, this comes in various forms, and it's an extension of what I just described. But some families actually create almost like a what would we call it, like a Shark Tank type ability for the next generation to almost pitch ideas, and this can start at a very young age. Some families have set up funds where I can pitch my idea, and I need $500 to make this happen, and I can begin to build business. Now that's low end. But in the business itself, if the business has some, say, scale at this point and ability, one great place for the next generation is to, get involved in helping to, say, grow the overall reach of the business or expand the portfolio. The Smith family is a great example of this, where they're still in the trucking business, which is what their original business was. But now through their family office, the next generation has been much more involved in things like mergers and acquisitions, real estate development. So the family does not actively operate the trucking business anymore, but they're very active in sort of helping to grow what we call sort of the family enterprise, which has moved beyond a singular family business. So a lot of ways that this does happen, but again, I think it's creating that place or that forum, whether these are kids that are still in middle school or high school, to understand how to pitch an idea and then build it and grow it and succeed as well as fail, all the way up through actual entities such as investment offices or family offices that actively look to sort of grow and innovate.
You talked about the next generation, which leads to this next question, and you answered part of it. So I'll ask this other part, because I think the part you just talked about really effectively is, what are some of the dynamics the next generation may be facing when they're coming into the company? But let's specifically focus it on succession specific to that, because there are still these expectations around perhaps you have to go to another company and get experience before you come here, or you have to be in the company, maybe be in a certain function before you can move up. We don't want you to have a diminished role in the company. At the same time, we don't want to over promote you, because the rest of the organization might reject that, nepotism and all those types of negative things that could come along with someone who might unjustifiably get that top spot in someone else's eyes, right? It's all about subjectivity here. How do we make it more objective? And how can the next generation be coming in a position of strength for themselves as an individual?
Yeah, I think this is a very important aspect for family businesses, because there are a lot of unwritten rules in family business. A lot of implicit actions we take that are based on many things. Sometimes they're based on gender, sometimes they're based on birth order, sometimes they're based on the family itself. And when those get sort of rolled into the family business, they can be very dangerous. If the oldest is always becomes the CEO, you might in the other generations that the business might need. I love to use this one example of a business here in Vermont, how they tackled this. And it was a business that was four brothers. And they actively had discussions around essentially creating a series of rules, almost like a constitution. This was done on a piece of notebook paper, just written down. Process by which they got there that was important. And they all agreed that for the next generation, they needed to go get an education. Did not stipulate what that education was, just that the education itself was valuable for the individual, and that ultimately the business was not here to serve the individual was there to serve the business. Two was to go get outside experience. Again, this was not stipulated. It could be in a similar type industry, but that was not stipulated. But the underscore here was experience matters. And again, if you don't end up back at the family business, you need to succeed on your own. The third was returning to the business. If they so chose, they would have to work for one of the other brothers. And you would not come into a position immediately and work for your dad and then succeed him that easily. So you sort of had to see how other parts of the business worked. And then eventually, opportunities of leadership would be opened up to you if you were proved successful. And I love that example, again, because it was fairly simple. It was probably done around a kitchen table in one night, but it was the fact that they codified these rules, they shared them, and they all agreed to them. And I think that's what's ultimately important. It's not, just the mom or dad making these decisions and not sharing them openly. It's that there was buy-in across all of those families, and that it made sense. And those rules can be more formal. Some families have family constitutions, and they go much more in detail. But the process by which I think the family arrives at those rules, or at least stipulations for employment, are very important. Rather than when Junior knocks on the door, we're just going to give him a job or her a job because their last name is the same.
Right. This concept of a disruptive successor in this discussion we're having about next generation, I want to talk about that. What's a disruptive successor? Well, it's someone who they're charged with changing the status quo so that the business can stay relevant and current for the future. There's really an investment in the future, but it might feel a little disruptive, right? Because that's the nature of being a disruptive successor is. And so how do we balance that? And what would be some of the keys for a family firm to put someone in place very purposefully as a disruptive successor? Have you seen that happen, or do you have some perspective on that to share?
Yeah, this is, I think this is something that Jonathan Goldhill talks a lot about, and why it's important for the next generation to come in and really make their mark. This is a challenge. Most successors, their biggest fear is that the business will fail on their watch. So to come in and make these disruptive changes can be daunting, because if those changes don't pan out, then the burden of the family ends up on that person's shoulders. I love to tell this one story, and again, I think it exemplifies what a successor is. This was a business that was founded by two brothers, and it was in the skincare space. and they did mostly contract, or I'm sorry, they had a private label that they sold, and the business was not doing good. And the son of one of the fathers came in and took over. And this is a very dramatic example, so I am not saying this should be the way everyone approaches it, but I do think it sort of exemplifies a way for a successor to come in and sort of say, this is my business now. And essentially, in this case, the successor came in and told everybody they effectively needed to reapply for their jobs, that this was a different company now. We needed to take it in a very different direction because, and had numbers to sort of justify that. And some people thought, yeah, that's great. We can finally get rid of some of the dead wood around here. But, the successor was very clear that it meant everybody. And I can't tell you how many people were hired back, but I do know many of them were. But the message here was, this is not my father's company anymore. This is my company, and this is the direction I'm seeking to take this in. It paid off greatly, and the company today is still growing under that individual's leadership. But it takes bold moves like that. And I think the confidence to do so. And in this case, what was important was that individual had been out of the family business for 10, 15 years and had a very successful career. So, if we go back to that previous example, again, it underscores the value of outside experience and not coming back to the business just because, your family owns it and you're instantly seated as the vice president, waiting to be the CEO. So that outside experience is really key. And also just to be bold in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wind down our conversation, Dan, and people want to get in touch with you, what's a great way to find you online?
I think the easiest is just to search for Cornell Family Business. The Smith Family Business Initiative at Cornell does have programs not only for students, but for alumni and anyone in the family business community. We run a number of what we call peer leadership forums, which are YPO and Vistage style peer groups. We do a conference each fall in Ithaca. Hope to return to in person next year.
Beautiful place.
It is. The last 2 years have been virtual. And, what's been amazing about the virtual conference is that we've had nearly 400 attendees. I think the last time I looked, we had almost 25 different countries represented in that mix. So, there is a little bit of an upside component that, we have been living in the last 2 years. And then in the spring of each year, we do a one-day, what we call a Family Innovation Summit in New York City. Again, this is open to all that are in a family business. But easiest way to find us is just search Cornell Family Business, and you will find the Smith Family Business Initiative. Perfect.
I know you have a lot of favorite quotes, but is there one in particular that you'd like to share?
The quote that goes through my mind all the time is, "What if I succeed?" I think we are often filled with doubt in our own lives, in our professional lives, and it's very easy to see what failure looks like to us. And for some reason, sometimes we're just programmed to think that way. What if I fail at this? But if we turn that around a little bit and we think about what does success look like, ask yourself, what if I succeed at this? What comes next?
Awesome. Dan, thank you so much for being on the show with me today, sharing your insights, and maybe we'll have you come back in the future. We can talk a little bit more about all the things that we just hit the surface on today. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Sounds great. Thank you, Lori.